close your eyes for a moment, not literally but imaginatively, and picture this. The date is May 5, 2026. The city is Rome. The air has already acquired that particular quality that belongs only to the Italian spring, felt heavy, sun-baked, thick with the scent of pine and hot stone and the distant murmur of a city that has been hosting spectacles for nearly 3,000 years. You are at the Foro Italico, the most gladiatorial venue in all of tennis. Marble statues of athletes from another era stand frozen in eternal motion, their blank stone eyes looking down upon a rectangle of crushed red brick that has broken the hearts and the wills of champions for nearly a century. The shadows are long. The clay is groomed to perfection. And on this particular afternoon in the opening round of the 2026 Italian Open, two women walk onto that court. They are separated by 8 years of life, by 3 spots in the world rankings, and by an absolute ocean of psychological momentum. On paper, if you casually glance at the draw sheet over your morning coffee, if you let your eyes skate past the names without stopping, this looks like a standard innocuous early round matchup. World number 42 versus world number 45, 2 players outside the top 30. Filler, the kind of match you watch with one eye while scrolling your phone with the other. Let me tell you right now, with as much certainty as I have ever felt about any tennis match I have ever previewed, you would be dead wrong to look away. What we are actually looking at is a combustion chamber. A collision of trajectories so tense, so laden with desperation and ambition, that you can practically feel the air crackle around the baseline before a single ball has been struck. Walking out to the near side, let us call it the side closest to the camera's eye, is Alex Eala. She is 20 years old. She is a left-hander from the Philippines, a nation whose tennis hopes rest so heavily on her young shoulders that it is a miracle she can swing a racket freely at all. All season long on hard courts, she's been bending the very top of the sport toward her. A revelation, a phenomenon of timing and aggression, but right now she's stepping onto red clay, a surface where every single result so far in this 2026 season has ended in the same familiar, suffocating sting. Walking out to the far side is Magdalena Fręch. She's 28 years old, hailing from Lodz, Poland. Barely 18 months ago, she was the toast of the tour, a woman who reached a career-high ranking in the low 20s, a player nobody wanted to see in their quarter of the draw, a grinder who could take the legs out from under anyone on the right day. Today, she arrives in Rome carrying the agonizing weight of 5 consecutive singles losses. The bruises from those defeats are not just fresh, they are practically bleeding. Neither of these women can afford another loss. Something or someone has to break. Make no mistake about it, I am utterly fascinated by this match. And I am going to tell you exactly why I believe Alex Eala is going to walk off that red dirt with her hand raised, not because I am guessing, but because the evidence, when you lay it out piece by piece, points in only one direction. To understand the sheer gravity of what is about to happen, you have to start with Magdalena Fręch. You have to understand the ghost she is bringing onto the court with her, because her current condition, her recent form, her collapsing confidence, her desperate need for a win dictates the entire emotional landscape of this match. Roll the tape back to 2024. Go find the footage. Watch it. Magdalena Fręch was a force of absolute attrition. She was a revelation to watch if you loved the kind of tennis that makes the opponent quit from exhaustion rather than brilliance. She went down to Mexico and won Guadalajara, a WTA 500 event, not some minor tournament. She fought her way to the final in Prague. She went toe-to-toe with Aryna Sabalenka in Wuhan and pushed the hardest hitter in women's tennis to the absolute brink. She battled into the second week of the Australian Open. By October of that year, the computer had the number 22 next to her name. She earned every single point of that ranking. She was the ultimate grinder, steady, dependable, possessed of this suffocating ability to just keep the ball in play until you lost your mind. Her break-point conversion rate was the stuff of legend. When she got a look at a second serve, she broke her opponent in roughly 57% of her return games. That put her in the 93rd percentile of the entire WTA tour. The woman was a human backboard who could return anything. Her right-handed game was not built on overwhelming, terrifying power. It was built on depth, on relentless, metronomic consistency, on an unusual, almost sadistic ability to extend baseline rallies until the lungs burned and the opponent blinked first. But time comes for everyone in professional sports, and the year 2025 was unbelievably unkind to Magdalena Fręch. The magic started to fade. The shots that used to paint the baseline started landing 2 feet short. The rallies she used to win through sheer willpower started ending with her framing the ball into the stands. Her record that year slipped to a dismal 15 wins and 25 losses. She finished the year ranked 59th, a brutal fall from grace for someone who had just tasted the rarefied air of the top 20. And the tragic reality is that 2026 has offered no salvation. The erosion has continued. As she walks onto the court in Rome, she stands at 10 wins and 11 losses for the year. But here is the statistic that should be setting off alarm bells in her camp. On clay specifically, a surface where she historically holds a very respectable 55% career win rate, a surface where she reached a final in Merida just 6 weeks ago, her form has completely and totally cratered. Look at what happened in Madrid just before arriving in Italy. She played Solana Sierra. It was a straight sets loss, but the scoreline does not tell the full story of the devastation. Frech managed to generate only 3 break points in the entire match. She won just 59% of her first serve points. That is not just a bad day at the office. That is a systemic breakdown of her core identity as a tennis player. You have to put yourself in the mind of a grinder, a player whose entire livelihood depends on outlasting opponents, on suffering more than the person across the net, requires an immense, overflowing reservoir of self-belief. Confidence is the absolute bedrock of that play style. If you do not believe you can hit the 25th ball in a rally, you will miss the 5th. And confidence is the very first resource that drains away when you are riding a 5-match losing streak. The internal monologue changes. The legs feel a little heavier, the margins feel a little tighter. The racket, which used to feel like an extension of your arm, starts to feel like an unfamiliar object. So what does this mean for Alex Eala? It means she is walking into a match against a veteran who, by every single measurable metric of recent form, is diminished. I am not saying Frech is finished. Her career numbers on clay are far too robust for anyone with an ounce of tennis knowledge to completely write her off on this surface. But she is visibly compromised, and in the shark tank of professional tennis, that is blood in the water. Recognizing when your opponent is psychologically fragile, recognizing when they are hopping to win rather than believing they will win, is a massive skill in itself. And Alex Eala, despite her youth, possesses that killer instinct. Now let us talk about Eala herself, because if you are a casual fan who only checks the scores on your phone, you might completely misunderstand her 2026 clay court season. You might look at the app and see that she lost to Leylah Fernandez in Stuttgart. You might see that Elise Mertens absolutely dismantled her in Madrid. You might look at those results and think the 20-year-old is lost in the woods, but you have to look closer. You have to examine the texture and the context of those losses, because they tell a very different story from the one the scorelines suggest. Let us break down Stuttgart. That was only her second match on red clay for the entire year. And who did she draw? Leylah Fernandez, a player who, despite being born in Canada, moves and slides on clay as if she was raised on the courts of Roland Garros. The scoreline was 1-4. It was brisk, it was painful, sure, but Eala had barely acclimated her lungs to the dust. She was still finding her footing, still learning how to trust her slides, still recalibrating her timing for a surface where the ball behaves differently than anywhere else on earth. Madrid, however, told a wildly different story, a story that hints at what is going to happen today in Rome. In the opening round of Madrid, Eala drew Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova. We are talking about a former Grand Slam finalist, a veteran who has played literally hundreds of professional matches on European clay. And what did Eala do? She dispatched her with a calmness that bordered on the chilling 6-3, 6-3, minimal fuss. She served relatively well. But more importantly, she constructed points with the patience of a seasoned dirt baller. She used her left-handed angles to drag Pavlyuchenkova completely out of her comfort zone, opening up the court and hitting into the empty spaces with a precision that made the former finalist look ordinary. Yes, the loss to Mertens in the next round was ugly, 2-1, but you have to acknowledge what happened on the other side of the net. Elise Mertens was playing at a level that was frankly absurd. Mertens won 93% of her first serve points in that match. I do not care if you're playing on clay, grass, hardcourt, or the surface of the moon. If your opponent is winning 93% of their first serves, you are going to get flat. There is no strategy, no adjustment, no tactical masterstroke that can overcome that kind of statistical anomaly. So when I evaluate Eala's clay swing leading into this match in Rome, my single takeaway is not that she is failing. My takeaway is that she has proven she is highly capable of winning convincingly on this surface, provided she faces a very specific profile of opponent. Eala thrives against players who give her time to set her feet. She destroys players who do not overwhelm her vulnerable serve with raw, unadulterated pace. She excels against opponents who want to engage in prolonged, rhythmic baseline patterns, because in those patterns, Eala's return game and her ground strokes become absolutely lethal. And Magdalena Fręch fits that exact profile to absolute perfection. Let us get into the granular, tactical X's and O's of this matchup, because this is where the match will be won and lost. Magdalena Fręch averages 3 aces per match. 3. Her average serve speed sits squarely in the bottom 20% of the entire women's tour. She does not step up to the line and blast you off the court. She cannot buy free points with her serve. Instead, she spins it in. she invites you into the rally. She challenges you to beat her from the ground, to outlast her, to prove you can hit one more ball than she can. The catastrophic problem for Frech in this specific match is that Alex Eala's single greatest weapon as a professional tennis player is her return of serve. Eala's return game is custom-built to utterly dismantle a slow server. When you are serving in the mid-90s miles per hour, and your opponent is treating every single second serve as a personal insult and an invitation to attack, you are in for a very long, very painful afternoon. Multiple high-level tennis analysts have already labeled Eala as having one of the most terrifying return games among the rising stars of the sport. Watch her feet when the opponent tosses the ball for a second serve. Eala does not just hold her ground, she actively steps inside the baseline. She takes the ball incredibly early on the rise and drives it back with a penetrating, heavy depth that immediately robs the server of time. Even more critically, she has a preternatural talent for instantly flipping the geometry of the point onto the server's weaker side, typically the backhand. Now, against a massive server like an Elena Rybakina, this aggressive return posture carries an enormous amount of risk. A massive first serve will jam Eala, pin her back, and completely shatter her timing. But against Magdalena Fręch, against a woman who might hit 2 aces in 3 sets, Eala's return prowess is going to operate at maximum capacity without any fear of reprisal. Every time Frech tosses the ball, she is going to be looking at a 20-year-old standing 2 feet inside the baseline, loaded like a coiled spring, ready to dictate the point from stroke number 1. But I know what the skeptics are thinking. I hear the obvious counterargument loud and clear. Let us talk about the elephant in the room, Alex Eala's serve. It is a known vulnerability. It is the glaring weakness in her game. She averages barely 1 ace per match. Her first serve percentage often hovers in the low 60s, which is simply not good enough against elite returners. And the speed of her delivery is among the lowest of anyone ranked inside the top 50. On a clay court, where the soft surface acts like a sponge absorbing pace, giving the returner precious fractions of a second of extra time, this weakness should theoretically be massively amplified. And when you factor in that Magdalena Fręch is an elite returner herself, a woman who converts break points at a staggering rate of nearly 4 breaks per match, you have to ask the question, isn't Eala walking into a buzzsaw where her own service games are going to be shredded to pieces? In theory, on a whiteboard, yes. But tennis is not played on a whiteboard, it is played on dirt, and this is exactly where the absolute magic of the left-handed factor intervenes and changes the math entirely. Eala's serve may lack terrifying pace, but what it lacks in speed, it makes up for in geometry. She generates angles that right-handed opponents find incredibly awkward, unnatural, and physically uncomfortable to deal with. The left-handed slice serve out wide on the ad court is a nightmare weapon. It pulls the returner completely off the doubles alley in a direction they almost never have to move. And on clay, this is magnified tenfold. Because of the way the red dirt grabs the ball, that heavy slice serve bites and kicks and skids away from the opponent at angles that defy right-handed muscle memory. Magdalena Fręch's entire return positioning, her footwork, her split step, her subconscious expectations of where the ball will go will require constant, agonizing adjustment to account for a spin direction she almost never sees. Think about the math here. There are perhaps a dozen prominent left-handers in the entire WTA top 100. Fręch will have faced very few of them over the last year, and I guarantee you she has not faced any of them during her current soul-crushing 5-match losing streak. Eala's serve might be slow, but it is going to be a geometric nightmare for a player whose confidence is already severely rattled. But to truly predict this match, we have to elevate our view beyond topspin and forehand court positioning. We have to look at the psychological warfare happening inside their heads. The quiet, invisible battle that no camera can capture and no statistic can quantify. Alex Eala arrives at the gates of Rome with something that completely transcends her recent clay court win-loss record. She arrives with a full-season narrative that positions her as a rising tide. Think about what she has done in 2026. She went to Dubai and battled her way to the quarterfinals, pushing Coco Gauff to her absolute limits in a match that made the whole tour stop and watch. She made the 4th round in the desert at Indian Wells. She pushed deep into the last 16 at the Miami Open, backing up her incredible run there the previous year where she took down Iga Swiatek and Madison Keys. Her career-high ranking of number 29 came just 2 months ago. Yes, her ranking has slid from 29 down to 42. That drop is mathematically real, but look at when it happened. It corresponds almost entirely to the transition to the European clay swing. It is happening on a surface where she has historically, admittedly, struggled. But here is the crucial defining difference. Eala knows she struggles on clay. Her coach Joan Bosch knows she struggles on clay. The entire team knows it, and yet look at her schedule. They deliberately booked a punishing, packed clay court itinerary. Linz, Stuttgart, Madrid, now Rome, and after this Parma, Strasbourg, and finally the French Open at Roland Garros. This is not the scheduling of a player who is trying to protect her ranking. This is not a player hiding from her weaknesses. This is a deliberate, calculated embrace of suffering. Eala and her team are intentionally accepting short-term pain, accepting the sting of early round losses for the sake of long-term foundational development. When she loses on clay right now, she is learning. She's not a player in crisis. She is a player under construction. She's a 20-year-old absorbing data, adapting her footwork, learning how to suffer on the dirt so that 3 years from now she can win Paris. Magdalena Fręch, by stark contrast, is existing in a completely different psychological universe. When you are 28 years old and your ranking has violently slipped from the low 20s down to the mid-40s, and you cannot buy a win to save your life after losing 5 straight matches, the internal calculation is dark. It is heavy. The agonizing question keeping you awake in your hotel room at night is not, am I building towards a grand slam? The question is, was 2024 my absolute peak? And is this the beginning of the end? I'm not suggesting for a second that Magdalena Fręch is consciously telling herself she is finished. Elite athletes are wired to fight that thought. But the body knows, the subconscious knows. Confidence during a losing streak at age 28 feels like trying to hold sand in your fist. Confidence during a learning curve at age 20 feels like planting seeds. Eala is playing for the future. Fręch is desperately trying to hold onto the past. So how is this actually going to look when the umpire calls play? Let me map out the exact tactical construction I expect to unfold on the Foro Italico. Eala is going to come out of the gates like a heavyweight fighter looking for an early knockout. I expect her to open the match with a hyper-aggressive return posture. She's going to stand aggressively inside the baseline, especially on Fręch's second serve. Her goal in the first 10 minutes is purely psychological. She wants to establish instantly, violently, that every single service game Fręch plays today is going to be a brutal, breathless contest. Alex Eala wants to send a message: you are not getting any free points today. If Eala can secure an early break of serve in the first set, and given Fręch's current shattered confidence and weak delivery, this is highly probable, the entire complexion of the match shifts irreparably. You see, Magdalena Fręch is fundamentally a frontrunner. She's a player who needs the scoreboard in her favor to play her best, most suffocating tennis. Look at the historical data. Her career numbers dictate that she wins 62% of her matches when she takes the opening set. But in 2026, when she gets dragged into a third set, her win rate plummets to a catastrophic 44%. She is not a comeback artist. When she falls behind, especially lately, she does not swing freer, she tightens up. The racket gets heavy, the shots land shorter. From Eala's perspective, the absolute key to victory is to deny Fręch the one thing she craves most: rhythm. Eala cannot allow Fręch to settle into those long, comfortable, hypnotic rallies straight down the middle of the court. Eala must use her left-handed advantage to dictate the spatial dynamics. Eala's heavy topspin forehand is going to naturally pull the ball cross-court, directly into Magdalena Fręch's backhand side. Now on clay, where the ball kicks up high and heavy, this is normally a death sentence for a player with a one-handed backhand. Fręch uses a two-handed backhand, which offers more stability, so she won't be completely overwhelmed by the bounce. Therefore, the rally dynamic for Eala is not simply about breaking down a mechanical weakness on the backhand wing. It is about brutal side-to-side redirection. Eala needs to make Fręch run. But more importantly, Eala needs to exploit the glaring hole in Fręch's game, her passivity at the net. Fręch is a baseline dweller. She is comfortable 6 feet behind the line. She comes to the net rarely, and when she does, she wins only about 60% of those points, which is a poor metric for a professional. Eala, who trains at the Rafa Nadal Academy, has absorbed Spanish clay court variety through absolute osmosis. I expect Eala to utilize the drop shot. I expect short slicing angles. I expect her to forcefully drag Fręch out of her comfort zone, pulling her kicking and screaming into the front court, forcing her to hit awkward volleys or scramble for low-bouncing balls. That is where the match will be won, not in the long, grinding rallies that Fręch wants, but in the short, sharp, uncomfortable exchanges that Eala can dictate with her left-handed angles and her willingness to try things that a more conservative player would not attempt. We also have to talk about the sheer physical dimensions of these two athletes. Alex Eala stands at 5 feet 9 inches. Magdalena Fręch is shorter at 5 feet 7 inches. Traditional tennis wisdom often suggests that on a clay court, where rallies are grueling and balance on the sliding surface is everything, the shorter player actually has a slight advantage. A lower center of gravity allows a player to stay grounded, change direction smoothly on the dirt, and dig out low balls. But in this specific stylistic matchup, Eala's height gives her a critical leverage advantage, specifically on her ground strokes and her terrifying return of serve. Because she is taller and has a longer wingspan, Eala can take the ball earlier on the rise. She can get on top of the bounce. She can absorb Fręch's pace and redirect it with acute angles that a shorter player simply cannot physically generate without jumping out of her shoes. It might seem like a marginal advantage, 2 inches of height between two women ranked 3 spots apart. But let me assure you, at the elite level of professional sports, matches are decided in the margins. Furthermore, I want to emphasize a geographic reality about this tournament that drastically tips the scales in Eala's favor. We are in Rome, we are not in Paris, we are not in South America. The clay courts at the Foro Italico are unique. They play significantly faster than the heavy, grueling red dirt of Roland Garros or the smaller, wetter clay events elsewhere on the tour. The crushed brick here is laid differently. The balls tend to fly through the court with much more zip. Furthermore, the weather conditions in Rome in early May are often dry, sunny, and warm. This heat bakes the moisture out of the clay. It reduces that heavy, high-bouncing, mud-like characteristic that makes traditional clay court tennis so agonizing for players who like to hit the ball flat and take it early. Eala's entire game is built on quick reflexes, taking the ball early, redirecting pace, and hovering right around the baseline. Fast clay is her absolute dream scenario for this surface. If they were playing on a slow, wet, heavy court in freezing rain, that would brutally expose Eala's weak serve and massively reward the attritional grinding style that Magdalena Fręch wants to play. But the Roman sun and the fast Foro Italico dirt actively narrow the gap. The conditions neutralize Fręch's defensive grit and amplify Eala's offensive striking. So, taking all of this in, the deep analytics, the psychological warfare, the physics of the court, the trajectories of their careers, here is my definitive prediction. And I am not going to hedge my bets here, I want to be incredibly specific. I firmly believe Alex Eala wins this tennis match, and she does it in straight sets. If you want a projected scoreline, write this down. I am looking at 6-3, 6-4, or perhaps a slightly tighter 6-4, 6-3 victory for the 20-year-old from the Philippines. I do not expect a bagel. You are not going to see a 6-0 demolition here. Magdalena Fręch is far too experienced, far too proud, and far too competent a professional ball striker to be utterly humiliated. Even in the depths of a terrible losing streak, she will fight, she will dig in. She will make Eala earn every game. But I fully expect Alex Eala to ruthlessly control the tempo of this match right from the return side of the court. I expect Eala to break Fręch's serve at least once, probably twice per set with relative comfort. I expect Eala to manage her own service games just well enough, using those tricky slicing left-handed angles and unpredictable point variety to keep Fręch off balance. Eala will do exactly enough to prevent Fręch from establishing the suffocating return pressure the Polish veteran desperately needs to stay in the match. My absolute confidence in this outcome is built on a tripod of 3 undeniable factors. First, look at the form trajectory. Eala is building. Yes, she is building imperfectly. Yes, it is frustrating for her fans to watch at times, but she is ascending. Her clinical victory over Pavlyuchenkova in Madrid proved unequivocally that she has the tactical discipline to execute a winning game plan on red clay. Fręch, conversely, is in a state of freefall. She is declining currently by absolutely every measurable standard of the sport. Second, look at the structural stylistic matchup. Eala's most dominant, terrifying weapon, her aggressive return, is matched directly against Fręch's most glaring liability, her soft, predictable serve. That combination structurally favors the Filipino player in a way that no amount of experience or grit can fully overcome. Third, and perhaps most importantly, look at the psychological weight they are carrying. Alex Eala has absolutely nothing to lose today. She is a young player on her worst surface. Every single round she wins on clay is house money, it is progress, it is a bonus. Magdalena Fręch, on the other hand, is a veteran drowning in a slump, desperately trying to arrest a terrifying slide down the rankings. That kind of profound desperation can occasionally fuel a miraculous, fiery comeback performance. But much more often, especially against a young, fearless opponent, that desperation accelerates a collapse. Given the 5-match losing streak, I heavily lean toward the latter. The racket is going to feel like it weighs 50 pounds for Fręch on the big points. Now, as an analyst, I have to acknowledge the alternative reality. There's exactly one scenario, one narrow path through the woods where Magdalena Fręch wins this match. For Fręch to win, she has to walk out onto that court and serve vastly above her historical averages. She needs to hit her spots with pinpoint surgical precision. She needs to push her first serve percentage well above 65%. She needs to somehow sneak in 4, 5, maybe 6 aces. If she can do that, she can neutralize Eala's devastating return advantage by protecting her own serve. Fręch could then force the match into a grueling series of neutral, grinding baseline rallies. And in a purely neutral, 50-shot rally on a clay court, Fręch's years of experience, her phenomenal pattern recognition, and her polished dirt court pedigree would give her a distinct edge. Remember, Fręch knows how to play clay court tennis in her bones. She grew up sliding on it in Poland. She won her junior titles on it. If her serve magically holds up under pressure, her baseline depth is good enough to pin Eala deep behind the baseline, exploiting the young Filipino's occasional hesitancy and lack of patience when forced to construct points from a defensive posture. But let us be realistic here. This scenario requires Magdalena Fręch to suddenly, miraculously play well above her current level. It requires asking a player whose confidence is completely shot, who's riding a 5-match losing streak, to walk onto a massive stadium court in the opening round of a premier tournament and produce her absolute best serving performance of the year. That is asking for a miracle, and I do not bet on miracles. There is one final critical piece of context surrounding this match that elevates the stakes to a fever pitch. We have to look ahead at the draw. The winner of this dogfight does not get a reward. The winner gets to face Xinyu in the second round. Wang received a first-round bye. She's a massive-hitting, terrifyingly powerful Chinese player ranked solidly in the 30s. She's the kind of player who hits the ball so hard it sounds like a gunshot. She will severely test the absolute physical limits of either Eala or Frech with raw, unadulterated power. Therefore, for Alex Eala, winning this opening round against Frech is not just about collecting a single victory, cashing a check and getting some ranking points. It is about survival, yes, but it is vastly more about momentum. It is about building the specific kind of early tournament emotional fire that has fueled her absolute best results all season long. Look at her history this year. In Dubai, she won a grueling opening match, absorbed that energy and rode the wave all the way to the quarterfinals. In Auckland, she scored a confident first-round win and surfed that belief straight into the semifinals. The pattern with Alex Eala in 2026 is crystal clear. If she wins her opener, if she gets a taste of blood in the first round, her self-belief compounds exponentially. She becomes a different, vastly more dangerous animal as the week goes on. A first-round loss would be survivable, but a first-round win could be the spark that ignites another deep run. I want to close by pulling back the lens and talking about what this match truly represents, because it is about so much more than a scoreline or a second-round berth. Alex Eala is doing something historic. She's the very first Filipino player to occupy this kind of rarefied space in the brutal, lonely world of professional singles tennis. She is ranked 42nd in the entire world, and she is only 20 years old. She has grown up sweating and bleeding on the courts of the Rafa Nadal Academy, absorbing the ethos of the greatest clay courter to ever live. She has stepped onto stadium courts and looked absolute legends like Iga Swiatek and Madison Keys in the eye, and she has beaten them. She has taken sets off Coco Gauff when Gauff was playing her best tennis. And yet here she is in Rome, actively choosing to compete on red clay, choosing to play on the one surface that gives her the absolute least reward, the surface that exposes her technical flaws the most. The surface that demands she transform her entire physical and mental approach to become something she was not naturally built to be. She could have skipped the clay, she could have rested, she could have waited for the grass or the summer hard courts, but she didn't. This is not a player avoiding difficulty. This is a warrior actively seeking out the fire. Magdalena Fręch, the veteran, the grinder, the former top 20 player desperate to save her season, is the obstacle standing directly between Alex Eala and the next critical step in this massive, ongoing construction project of a tennis career. When you strip away the noise, when you look at the cold, hard evidence, when you trace the form lines, when you analyze the brutal matchup dynamics, when you map the psychological terrain, and when you factor in the fast, dry physical conditions of these Roman courts, the conclusion is inescapable. I firmly, resolutely believe Alex Eala clears this hurdle. I am not saying it will be easy. I am not saying it will be a dominant, flawless masterpiece of tennis. There will be frustrating errors, there will be moments of tension. There will probably be a game or two where Frech digs in her heels and makes Eala hit one more shot than she wants to hit. But she will win. Clearly, this is her moment, this is her matchup, this is her match to take. The Foro Italico is waiting, the marble statues are watching. And on the 5th of May, 2026, on the fast red clay of Rome, Alex Eala begins her answer.